Teknologi Universitas Gadjah Mada, the Integration and Belonging Hub Clark University, and IASFM brings you a post-conference webinar in a moderated panel discussion format. The panel title is Innovative Approaches to Belonging in Urban Spaces, Reframing the Debate on Integration, Migration, and Inclusion from a Multidisciplinary Perspective. Next, let's start with some housekeeping. First, participants, you can post questions at Zoom chat or YouTube comments. Teman-teman yang lebih nyaman bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia, silahkan memakai bahasa Indonesia, nanti bisa kita bantu terjemahkan. Next, please fill out the attendance list. We will need this to issue the e-certificate. The link is provided in Zoom chat and also at YouTube comment. Also, watch out for any announcement from us in the chat. Please turn off your audio and video during the event. And last, a recording will be posted on our YouTube. You can search at RDI URAF on YouTube, yeah. Please follow our Instagram also for more information. The panel is actually part of the IASFM20 conference that was held in Yogyakarta last January. The theme of the conference was forced displacement in an urbanizing world, as the conference focused on the intersection between migration studies and urban studies. Unfortunately, at that time, the panel was impacted by the latest border restriction in the US, as most panelists were based in the country and were not able to travel to the conference. So, IASFM has agreed to provide this platform for the panelists to present their research, because border restriction, one of the issues often discussed in IASFM, should not stop us from doing that, right? Anyway, here we are today, hoping that we can have a good conversation on belonging and urban spaces at probably ungodly hours for a webinar, yeah? I'm aware that it's quite late in Indonesia right now and also very early in the US East Coast, so let's just get this through. As mentioned before, I will be your host for today. I don't think I need to introduce myself. You can just check our website, rdiuraf.org, for more information about what we do. But let me introduce our panel moderator, Craig Mortley. Craig is a forced migration practitioner and emerging scholar who has worked on LGBTQ+ asylum seekers and diverse refugee groups. He's interested in equity-centered practices, refugee narratives, and refugee representation in decision-making spaces. Craig is an adjunct faculty member at the University of Connecticut, teaching courses on human oppression and social policy analysis. He also co-founded the Share the Platform initiative. Now, because of the time zone difference, we decided to pre-record the panel presentation and the first part of the discussion last week, and have all the panelists joining us live for the second part of the discussion to answer your question. We will have 4 presentations and 6 panelists in this webinar, including myself. You can scan the QR code here to view their bio and the presentation abstract. The first presentation is from Adam Salzman and Craig Mortley, talking about their research in Worcester, followed by Tunggul Pujilestari with her research in Seattle, talking about food and identity. And then the next presentation is from Anita Fabos and Leora Khan on bridging refugee and settled communities. And then myself as the last presenter, talking a bit about something similar in the context of refugee in transit in Indonesia. As you listen to the discussion, please write your questions. Our team will compile and have them ready for the live discussion with the panelists later. Now, before we begin, I would like to invite you to have a very quick pause moment. I'm sure some of you had a busy day, so let's allow ourselves to calm our nerves down a little bit, yeah? So I'd like you to close your eyes and take a deep breath, counting 1 to 5 when you inhale, and again 1 to 5 when you exhale. Let's do that 2 more times. All right, now we're back. You can open your eyes now. Are we ready to start? Yes? Okay, cool. Give me a second to play the video.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is a recorded session for our roundtable, which is part of IASFM20 conference and is being brought to you in conjunction with the Clark University Integration and Belonging Hub, titled Innovative Approaches to Belonging in Urban Spaces, Reframing the Debate on Integration, Migration, and Inclusion from a Multidisciplinary Perspective. My name is Craig Mortley, and I'm honored to be your moderator today. The goal of today's roundtable is to begin a conversation about reconceptualizing belonging in our cities by challenging old assumptions and exploring new ideas about what it means to belong in urban spaces shaped by migration and forced displacement. This discussion brings together practitioners and scholars across different disciplines, fields, and backgrounds working on urban belonging, mobility, migration, and displacement. This multidisciplinary conversation will bridge theory, policy, and lived experience. Our panelists will speak about scholarly and applied projects that represent attempt to shift power relations to create meaningful space from new and historically marginalized perspective and what it means to belong for folks from displaced background living in diverse cities. The projects discuss centers the voices of people with lived experience of displacement and mobility. We recognize them as experts with critical knowledge to inform decision-making processes. Belonging is not a one-way street where only refugees and newcomers must adopt. Instead, we recognize mobility as a constant in urban life and integration as a two-way process and a dynamic process. Communities are not passive. They continuously integrate together with newcomers. Ultimately, this means seeing refugees and other displaced people as active participants in building inclusive cities and not outsiders. The Share the Platform initiative embodies this shift. We center the lived experiences of displaced people in our work, ensuring that refugees and newcomers' voices directly shape research and policy. When those with lived experience co-lead projects, it shifts power dynamics. Share the Platform was founded to foster the full partnership of refugees as a solution to co-creating knowledge for those most affected. Today, we'll have 4 brief conversation starters, each presenter offering a distinct perspective on integration and belonging. Together, they touch on participatory research, policy initiatives, cultural preservations, and new integration models. Craig and Adam will share how refugees, youth in Worcester, Massachusetts were engaged as co-researchers to examine their experience of belonging in the city, illustrating how participatory methods reveal the complex ways young newcomers might navigate urban life. Anita and Leora examines integration as a multi-directional process, not just refugees adopting, but host communities evolving as well. They highlight policies that foster and shared responsibilities for inclusion, moving beyond one-sided approach to integration. Tongol explores how small refugee community in Seattle works to preserve cultural identity while finding place in the city. This case study shows the resilience of an ultra-minority community and how cities can support cultural inclusion for even small groups. Aquino introduces trans integration model for refugees in prolonged transit, showing how displaced people and local communities can work together on integration even when permanent resettlement is not in place, challenging the idea that integration only begins after refugees have found a new home. Each presenter will have 5 minutes to go through their project, and after which we'll have a facilitated conversation. In closing, I thank the panelists for sharing their work, and our hope for this session is that it will spark new ideas and new initiatives and action that support and centers refugee voices, as well as co-create knowledge. In the spirit of share the platform, let us learn with and from each other. And we'll begin with our first presentation by Craig and Adam. I will start off the presentation with Adam. So our project titled Making Worcester Home, Youth Participatory Action Research, Newcomer Belonging, and the Politics of Navigating Urban Space was a youth participatory action research initiative
ada content marketing, ada YouTube vlog,
we had two
dan ada
cohorts
juga affiliate
of participants in 2019 and 2020, where we engaged youth as co-researchers. These youths were newcomers, and some youths had refugee backgrounds, and we explored their lived experience in the city, looking specifically on how they were making sense of belonging. Throughout the collaboration, we had activities like community mapping, photo voice, and journaling. And through those activities, we discovered that belonging is deeply multidimensional and intersectional, shaped by race, gender, migration status, and age. The youth express a sense of belonging in very complex ways, highlighting the continuous tension between place-based attachment and detachment. So in our interaction, we found that in some settings, the youth felt attachment, but also at the same time felt detachment. They felt attachment through memories, friendships, and community spaces that offered safety and solidarity. Yet simultaneously, they experienced alienation due to structural inequalities and systemic racism. One participant that I would highlight their story is Melody, who illustrates how navigating belonging required navigating intergenerational and racial tension that was amplified because of events like COVID-19 and the racial tension that was happening in 2020 in the US. Her reflection emphasized that collective storytelling and shared experiences can transcend division, build mutual trust and understanding, as well as solidarity. The experiences that the youths kind of shared reveal that systemic barriers like urban segregation, as well as under-resourced schools, does impact how they see their place within society, as well as within Worcester as their home. Belonging, as we learned, is not a fixed kind of state, but it's continuous and it's dynamically kind of changing. And it does reflect kind of broader societal issues that the youth and other newcomers have to grapple with. I'll turn it over to Adam.
Thank you, Craig. So just to build off of what Craig was saying, our paper seeks to bring together scholarship on belonging and urban space with scholarship on participatory action research, and particularly youth participatory action research, or YPAR. In particular, we felt that this was important because Craig and I were co-facilitators of the Making Worcester Home project. And we found that, as co-facilitators, we played an important role in the experience of the youth, in shaping the dynamic of the space. And so we found that there's something really enriching when we look at YPAR as a conceptual framework or an epistemology, in the way that it can shed light on questions of belonging, right? So we consider PAR or YPAR a dialogic arena, right? Where it's a space full of potential people coming from bringing multiple different positionalities come together, and so we argue that it's never the case that young people from refugee backgrounds involved in a research project are sort of telling their story alone. Rather, we would argue that the stories are being co-constructed in ways that touch the positionality of all the co-researchers, including Craig and I. And so I think Craig did a great job outlining the different findings in a brief way. So I would just want to maybe leave it there, highlighting the importance of kind of interrogating positionality to have that intersectional lens to look at belonging.
Thank you, Adam. We'll now have our next presenter, Tongo, who will present on her project.
Okay, thank you, Craig. My paper's title is Making a Home Out of the Dining Table, Food Identity and Belonging Among Cham Refugees in Seattle. So this research examines the complex process of homing among Cham refugees in Seattle, Washington, who have experienced multiple layers of displacements and marginalizations. They are originally from Champa Kingdom, in the broader discourse known as the Forgotten Empire. Out of the Southeast Asia, which located in the modern-day central Vietnam. They face historical dispossessions or erasures and invisibility in Southeast Asia. So in some academic and political discourse, have incorrectly labeled the Champa Kingdom and Cham people as extinct since its fall in the 14th century, contributing to the initial invisibility. Upon arrivals in the United States, the migrations process further obscured their Cham ethnic identity, contributing to their invisibility within the broad Asian American category and leading to frequent miscategorizations as Vietnamese or Cambodian. The resettlement in a historically redlined area further complicate these situations, exposing them to the enduring challenge, limited resources, and marginalizations. This explore how the Cham community, particularly women, navigate these intersections operations to reconstruct a sense of home. It argues that culinary practices plays a crucial role in homing strategies, facilitating crucial cultural preservations, identity reclamations, and the creation of community. This ethnographic research and analysis of personal narrative through this work demonstrates how foods become a powerful medium for establishing stability, security, and belonging in the context marked by historical trauma, ethnic erasures, and ongoing systemic inequalities. This research illuminated the dynamic and resilient effort of Cham refugees to facilitate a sense of home in the diaspora. Among the Cham refugee women, the memory of home stemmed from the memory of the starvations of food insecurity during the wartime and the harmonious feeling related to food sharing activity before the wartime. As recounted by one of my participants, she shared an incident from her time working in the rice field during the Khmer Rouge, where she left starving as a punishment for small mistakes. At the other participants, her memory of home sparked before the wartime when Cham close-knit community always share food during the Ramadan. The feeling of insecurity during wartime served as a powerful motivation for Cham refugees to actively recreate stable and secure communities through various food-related activities, ultimately fostering a sense of home in their new environment. Shared meals and communal cooking provided a vital re-establishment of routine and predictability. And in order to create feeling of home, Cham refugees, particularly women, actively engage in communal activities such as establishing the food heritage program, and utilizing restaurant or public spaces. In this case, it's a Salima restaurant, and then having an annual event such as Pasar Malam Ramadan. So this initiative tackle their often invisible identity through food-related activities, aiming to create homing experience. Yeah, I think that's it for me. It's a more related about the programs, about the program that they're created, about the food heritage programs, about the Salima restaurants, and then about the annual events such as Pasar Malam Ramadan. We can discuss this later in the discussions sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tangon, for your overview of your project. Anita and Leora will talk a little bit about their project.
Thank you, Craig. I'm Anita, and Leora and I are actually going to use the example of the Integration and Belonging Hub initiative as a way to highlight some of the policies and practical approaches that our work with the Hub explores.
And I am Leora, and Anita and I established the Integration and Belonging Hub at Clark to respond to the pressing need to involve migrants and refugees as a vital part of the 21st century transformation, as Craig was saying in his introduction. And it's not just for newcomers and minorities, it's in our society. This is a time of social, economic, political, environmental strain. And we see the IBH as an initiative that goes beyond either pro-immigrant or anti-immigrant thinking.
Yeah, I think as Craig also mentioned in the opening, the model or the idea of integration that the IBH takes is as a dynamic process where societies include mobile people among them. So we don't necessarily single out refugees as having refugees, forced migrants, migrants of different legal statuses. We recognize that that's the case, but we look at the interaction that happens among people as a process of integrating together, which means that there is accountability for integration also on the part of people who are settled. And we seek innovative approaches for finding ways and projects and practical initiatives, as well as policies for creating these kinds of shared worlds. We are also hoping to cultivate a new generation of practitioners and scholars and to develop frameworks to support multi-directional processes of social cohesion. Our work with migrant and refugee background people does overlap with other efforts to address structural marginalization and inequality, but our lens is around the mobile and migrant background people, whether from newcomer backgrounds, whether from internal migrants, and this is the important point of our society's need to accommodate mobility for these social cohesive processes. Our research and practice highlights the urgency to shift our view of societies as sedentary receivers of migrants and instead involves them as key participants in sustainable and multi-scalar development.
So one of our major goals is to strengthen partnerships with organizations working with long-term integration and belonging for newcomers, particularly in urban settings. So we have joined together a collaboration with several key refugee organizations in Worcester, which is where Clark is based, whose innovative programming offers opportunity for our Clark students to develop their understanding and skills through internships and project work, which we'll talk about later.
As one example, to just start us off, we've established recently, January actually, an agreement with the African Community Education, which is an organization that champions community development for African background and Haitian background residents of Worcester. And we've been developing community engagement activities together. And we've also been developing another partnership with a refugee-fronted organization that describes themselves as taking integration further than the resettlement agencies through their deeper engagement and understanding of the needs of the various needs of refugee families in Worcester. And they are also part of a training program that our students also participate in to train refugee advocates among community members. And finally, we're also building educational and research partnerships with peer institutions in Worcester and elsewhere. This is primarily universities, but we're partnering with other kinds of institutions as well, and we've taken some initial steps in this regard.
So another example that is a growing collaboration with the hub is two Greek universities in the city of Thessaloniki, where we're exploring the city to explore integration and belonging in the context of food and urban culture, to Tongol's, sort of her collaborations. And we work with a chef and a food historian to understand the unique cuisine of Thessaloniki through the lens of historical and ongoing movement of people, because Thessaloniki is historically a land, there's a lot of movement in that city of different kinds of people. And we brought Clark students there last year to conduct interviews with neighborhood food sellers to learn about migration and belonging through eating.
So we'll tell you a little bit more about these initiatives as we go along, but I think we'll leave it here at the moment. And Craig, thank you so much for the chance to share a little bit about the IBH, and looking forward to our roundtable discussion.
Thank you, Anita and Leora. And we'll have Aquino, who will talk about the transition integration model for refugees.
Thank you, Craig, and hello, everyone. Aquino here. I actually wanted to start by pointing out your project, Adam and Craig, about the Youth Participatory Action Research, because for us at RDI URAF, we did a very similar project that you did. We call it Creative Placemaking Project, because we wanted to see as well, how young refugees in Indonesia connect to place, to where they are, and to people who share the same space or place with them. And I think I don't know if you did this in your project, but we also have another group of local youth, and we frame this sort of participatory action research as a way to look at social integration. And that kind of started the whole thing in our group on exploring what integration means for a country like Indonesia. And I think so that brought me back the memory of that project, which is very, very I think similar with what you explained about integration, or like belonging is a multi-layered, multi-dimensional thing. I think within the transition integration model, I don't want to explain the whole model thing, but I wanted to share like two big concepts, or maybe not concepts, questions, or the things that made me question a lot of things. One is on integration itself, and the other one is on transit or transition. Integration, when you talk about integration of refugees or asylum seekers in Indonesia, within Indonesian system, it's a very no-no word because in general, Indonesia doesn't want to have people staying in the country. We are not a signatory of the Refugee Convention, and so everything about refugees or asylum seekers is seen as something as temporary, only for a short time, And so the word integration is a big red flag for a lot of Indonesian system people, stakeholders, even though that researchers or people who are against that are very much pushing for some sort of integration model. And I think that is because our understanding, or our sort of the definition of integration itself, comes from a very different concept or a very different context than Indonesia. So we were looking for literatures talking about integration in the context of so-called transit countries, not resettlement countries, but the countries where, you know, displaced population pass through. And it was quite difficult to find something similar as to what Indonesian context is. And so we embarked on sort of conceptual discussion about what integration means, you know. And this is perhaps part of the study result, part of individual, my own reflection. But I see that when you talk about integration in Indonesia, I use the word integration for the lack of better vocabulary on my side, I suppose, is that integration, I see it as a spectrum, you know, and we talk about integration from the society kind of level, but when you see it from a more microscopic level, like individual level, us individual as a microcosm of humankind, I think we talk as individuals about, oh, I want to live a well-integrated life, you know, I want to be grounded in the place that I live, you know. It talks about grounding, it talks about connection to earth, connection to places. And I think once you step your foot in one place, then you are starting the process of integrating into that place. And it doesn't mean that you have to live in that place forever, but it means that you're connecting to the space where you are. And so I feel like when we talk about integration, that sort of maybe fit a little better in the Indonesian context for refugees and asylum seeker, I would like to talk about integration from a more individual level. It started at individual level. The word itself, I think, the integration word itself implies, you know, us and them, you know, you integrate it into something. Someone has to integrate into something to be accepted in the society where they are. And I think there is a nuance of not coercion, but, you know, being forced into something. And I think that is what we would like to kind of challenge, because I see integration as a matter of coexistence, that we are living alongside each other. It is natural and it's not forced. And that's why when I looked at marker of integrations that are in the literatures, you know, economic, social, work, political services, those kind of wording are very much, for me, it doesn't sound natural. When I think about coexistence in the integration form, those markers don't really fit. But I would prefer to use something like, for example, for economic, instead of job, we talk about livelihood. Instead of political, we talk about participation. Instead of services, we talk about ecologies of care, you know, caring to each other. So I think that is one, not one, but some of the things that kind of, for me, are quite different when we talk about integration in Indonesian sense. The other concept, sorry, Craig, one more minute. The other concept that I'd like to touch upon is about transit or transitory thing. I had a friend who asked me, and actually not a friend, a lot of people ask me, why do people stay in Indonesia when Indonesia is only a transit country? But I think, you know, that question, although it is meant to understand why refugees and asylum seekers stay in Indonesia for a long time, it hit me quite hard, because I feel like I am an immigrant for a long time, and I feel like it's the same question for me. Why do I stay in this country when I only want to be here for a while, for a short while? And I think this notion of transit or transitory really influences the perception of, you know, why do we care about refugees and asylum seeker in the country where the country itself don't recognize refugees and asylum seekers. So I'm looking at Indonesia more as a country of transition, like transition in life. And that's where talking about political, social, or economic integration becomes a little bit more natural and comfortable, because we're talking about transition in life. Everyone has to go through that kind of transition. And these two concepts are what we would like to kind of challenge in the transition integration model, that integration is a matter of everyday practices. It's a spectrum. It's not rigid and fixed, and the markers are also not rigid and fixed, but it's, like you said, it's multidimensional. Dimensional. It is dynamic, and it reflects, how people are generally, doing things in their life of transition. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aquino. And I think this is good transition into our discussion or facilitated discussion phase where we will be in conversation with each other. So while we have some guided questions, I do encourage us to be in that conversational space. And so kind of with that being said, I'll lead off into our first kind of facilitated question that is posed to the first presenter, Adam and Craig, but anybody can kind of add into that conversation. So from your research, what insights do participatory research methodologies, such as YPAR, provide to reshape our understanding of urban belonging? And how did your project employ principles of shared the platform? And what lessons can we draw from those experiences?
Thanks for that question, Craig. It's a wonderful question. I think it covers a lot of ground. I think, and this gets actually at something I had sort of meant to say in my remarks and then didn't. But I think that what we tended to do was look at participatory action research as a space in and of itself, right? And so we rely on this concept of the participatory contact zone that Maria Elena Torre and her colleagues have been writing about for some years now, where, like as I was saying before, all these different positionalities collide, right, in this space to co-produce knowledge. And I think that what we found, part of our findings in our work is that through the sort of dialogic process of our the youth and co-facilitators, well, we really got a sense of the ways in which the youth were able to mobilize their own identities as part of the sort of participatory action research's commitment to transformative social change. So that was important, right, in the sense that the youth were not just commenting on their sense of inclusion or exclusion in the city, but they were actively playing a role in and thinking together about how to cultivate collective action to make change. So for like a big example in our project, and this is very true in a lot of YPAR studies, because it's obvious, basically youth who are in the K through 12 system, high school age youth, one of the key things that they want to address are injustices within the school system. And so we found that the youth were very active in like sort of mobilizing their identities as newcomers, as refugees, as youth of color, as like young men and women to try to affect that change. And so I think that was that could have happened anyway, but it happened in particular, I think, because of the epistemological commitment to research as a tool for change that PAR represents.
Thank you, Adam. And the only thing I'll add to that is the kind of value of amplifying the youth voices and kind of tying it back to our concept or initiative, Share the Platform, and how being in that participatory contact zone promoted critical consciousness. And one of the things that we also found in our interaction with the youth is rethinking activism. And that is something I have been interested in terms of exploring a little bit more of newcomers' role in kind of activist spaces and social movements. And one of the things that came out of some of the discussion was using social media as a tool and as a space for that activism.
I also Oh, I
But
also just wanted to add one other piece here, which is I think from like thinking about share the platform, I think that Power also invites us to be like reflexive and critical of the research process. And I just want to say that I think, you know, our paper really delves into the power dynamics of the research process itself. Like I'm a professor at a university that was giving a credit to the students who participated in this program, right? And so I think we have to also recognize that as well, as sort of like a sort of a limitation, or another way to think about it, another set of factors that inform the sort of co-construction process.
thank you, Adam. I'll invite Anita into the conversation and then Aquino.
Oh, I was curious about the framing of belonging that you raised in the early part of your presentation. Did you find that this interaction and the kind of dialogue that you had from all of these different positionalities allowed people to think about belonging in new ways and maybe more individual ways, or ways that didn't necessarily square with a kind of more social level or more formal ideas about belonging?
I would just say like really quickly, and then Craig, I think you should add something here. I think that what we noticed was that belonging is a dynamic that is continuously in like fluid and co-produced. So the as the youth were engaging with us and with each other, they were informing each other's sense of attachment to space or alienation from space. That there was belonging that was sensed in shared experience of othering, of being othered, right, as well. So I think that it's that sort of like dynamic and fluid and interactional or relational aspect to it, I think is probably one of our key findings in that area.
Yes, and I think, as Adam said, those shared kind of experiences, and I remember in one of the mapping exercise, one you kind of was looking on the other students' map and was like, this is not the Worcester I experienced. And so in those moments, they were kind of learning from each other about their connection, whether that's the place or even connection with each other. And it offered kind of a critical kind of space and tool to think about their place and the Worcester that they want to live in. The other piece was kind of thinking about belonging, place-based attachment, but also thinking about like economic integration into the future. These were youth, and so many of them were thinking about, as Worcester is redeveloping, what is their place and what kind of future do they have, while some were ambivalent to kind of what was happening and felt somewhat stuck and obligated to make, consider Worcester home, because that's kind of where they ended up.
Thank you, Craig and Adam. And I think what you just discussed now, for me, thinking about it in the context of Indonesia as a place of transit for a lot of people, we talk about belonging in a place where one day you'd have to move on, and you don't know when that happens. It can be tomorrow, it can be 10 years from now. And so I think there's another thing for me when talking about belonging. It's also, there is a notion of, I'm afraid to belong here because I will move, I don't know when, but also it's very interesting that when we have conversations with these young people, they are not afraid of belong to a place or a community or a group. I think what they're afraid of is the uncertainty of the time. I think that plays a big part of it. I have a question though, still regarding your project. Do you see any or can you share maybe some insights on role modeling or like some sort of mentorship relations between either the facilitator and participants, or between participants, or between young people and young adults, or whoever is involved in the process. I think that became one of our big takeaway from our participatory action research, is that it's maybe because also this concept of being in transit, they don't really have role models in their areas or in their communities, as the adults are going through like different kinds of issues. And so role modeling is one of the big thing in our research, but we didn't really have any sort of reference or any kind of insights from other projects on that. So I wonder if you could share a little bit on that. Yes, thank you.
So the youth learn from each other. We didn't necessarily, as Adam mentioned, there was somewhat of a hierarchical kind of relationship, even though we tried to flatten some of those. But, our positionality, and even though we recognize and talk to those positionality, I do feel that did impact, and the youth kind of there were kind of horizontal, I guess, role modeling that happened, but also us as facilitators kind of modeling some of those behaviors and thinking through what belonging means for us. All right, so in the interest of time, we're going to move the conversation a little bit further. So what strategies can others adopt for Tungle? What strategies can others adopt from a cultural kind of or even artistic initiatives, such as culinary traditions and exhibitions to preserve identity and belonging in urban spaces?
Yeah, thank you, Craig. So what other communities and urban spaces can adopt several strategies leveraging culinary traditions to preserve identity and belonging, while actively including the voices of newcomers in co-creating these spaces, is from the rich example of the Cham community refugee in Seattle. One of the, I guess some of the strategies that I can mention is through the established community-led food heritage programs. So this is actually the food heritage program is a program that's been running for 15 months. It's the purpose of the project is where the elders or long-term residents of Cham refugees share traditional recipes and cooking technique with the younger generation, especially youth. And also they also invite newcomers and then other immigrant community, including me. I'm from Indonesia, and then this can be done through workshops, cooking classes, and the creating of community cookbooks. So this been the cookbook is one of the like a bigger output of this project, and this is the ongoing output of this program is also the creation of the Instagram page. So it is a parallel with your social media as activists, as you mentioned before, and the youth community in Connecticut. And this Instagram page of a Cham refugee youth called the Sang King of Champa. It's literally means the kitchen of Champa. So where they share the foods that they learn from the elders, and then and this program also facilitating the language restoration as well. So if I can say this call as a throw one stone and then you get the two birds. So the first thing is you get the recipe, you can preserve the traditional recipe or food tradition of Cham community, and then at the same time you learn the language that is been endangered as well. And then the second is the creations of the shared culinary spaces through the Salima restaurant. So Salima restaurant is the first pan halal restaurant, Southeast Asian pan halal restaurant in South Seattle. And then the other event is annual event called the Pasar Malam Ramadan. It's on like a Malay word. Pasar Malam Ramadan is a pop-up event or market, and it's organized regular pop-up event that showcase the diverse culinary talents within the urban spaces, including newcomers. And then in this place, they can provide a platform for sharing foods, generating income, and increasing their visibility. So this project is very personal to me. To intersect the food and the remaking of home, because I'm a migrant myself, and then cooking has been like a powerful storytelling and the tangible link for my past. So it's like a remind me of home when I'm cooking, and it's recreating a sense of home during my migration journey as well here in the United States. So those are the strategies that I can so far I can gather from my field work. So yeah.
Thank you, Tonal. So to kind of move us along and to kind of close out the conversation, I want us to kind of think of actionable practical strategies or initiatives, thinking about all our projects and how they intersect and relate to each other, that our listeners could, kind of use as they're thinking about reconceptualizing integration, whether that's on the policy level. And it's an open invitation for us all to share.
I wonder if I could jump in and respond to the great opportunity that we have coming from different parts of the world. And I really appreciated, Akina, the way that you described the way that people's personal experiences of, integrating in transit intersects with the global reality that, in Indonesia, there is a kind of a connection with the global refugee regime, and it is situated in a way that it is not supposed to be a place where people settle, and yet people do. And I was going to contrast that with the United States, which is rapidly changing. We know this. But at the same time, there is a narrative in the United States of settlement and a country made through the process of immigration, right? So it's very different, very alternative perspective of integration. And yet there is a tendency, I think, for people who work with newcomers, and particularly formally settled refugees. So the U.S. is a signatory to the 1951 convention and does have a formal resettlement program, or did until the current administration put it on pause. But the point that I wanted to make is that there is a lot more going on in our communities than this very managed intentional practice of settling people through these resettlement programs. And I think for us, in the Integration and Belonging Hub, we deliberately moved away from working with the formal settlement agencies, which is very interesting. The students love it, and they enjoy working with newcomers and getting them oriented and on their feet. But we took a decision really to work with organizations led by migrant and refugee background people who have not just an experience of moving themselves, but they have a different way of navigating community relations, whether they be between migrant communities, because it's not all happy clappy among migrants either, right? And our community partners have a lot of that to do, but also working with settled people and creating new ways of being a Worcesterite, a resident of Worcester, for longer term settled people to see. And I think that has been something very interesting and very useful. And it speaks, I think, to our initial idea of this more dynamic, more relational, but also more contingent kind of integration. So thanks for this opportunity to kind of think about that point a little bit more deeply.
Thank you, Anita. Before we close, Leora, Kino, anything to add to the conversation?
No, I just sort of want to reiterate with Anita how we really have to change, observing, and this is like, a lot of the organizations have like this white savior complex and turning refugees into citizens, discouraging mobile people from being connected to international networks of belonging, and really trying to get them to fit into sedentary lives. So, we've all sort of talked about that, and that's not the way that we are thinking it, I think all of us, in trying to change those narratives, and have them stop thinking about integration work as a return on investment and expecting gratefulness. And then that's like something that we are trying to really change at the hub, which is very, very, I think, destructive and I like, Akina, what you said about coexistence. I really like that word. I think Anita and I were talking about integration and we were thinking, you know what, that is not a great word. And we sort of might have to change it. So it's integration. I think coexistence is a really, really better way of thinking about it. So I thank you for bringing that up and all of your work and interest of all the panelists.
Oh, can I say something for the last time before we end these discussions? Yeah, so when I'm doing my readings, I came across with the Anita's papers about making home in the limbo.
Oh,
Yeah. So it's make me thinking about my own country, Indonesia, and then in practice how the people in transit, especially women, making home, or is there like even do they make home in the transit country? And then if so, how do they do that? And then it's also dragging me into this reflections of the current situations, political situations of Cham refugee and other refugee who resettle in the United States, even though they are already settled in the third countries such as United States. Right now they are living in a limbo, like very uncertain situations. And then looking at them during my field work, I feel like how this current political situation will impact them and then their future generations, and then how about the second generation as well. So it's kind of, yeah.
Thank you for that. And thank you, panelists, for this rich discussion. As I indicated in the beginning, this was just, if you want to say, an appetizer to the main course. It is getting the conversation started. Some of the things that kind of stood out to me is that multi kind of directional adaptation that needs to happen. We need to reconceptualize how we even think about integration, or should we even be using the word integration? Should there be another concept that better emphasizes that co-creation, that co-existence together? And so I do want to express my deepest gratitude for each of you for this stimulating and rich discussion, for sharing your insights and your expertise. And we will continue this dialogue to explore a little bit more And I do encourage folks to check out the Share the Platform initiative on our website at sharetheplatform.org. Thank you for your participation, and I do wish for you a good rest of your night for some folks and day for the others.
All right. Thank you, everyone. That would be the end of the pre-recorded video. And thank you for Mati and team at Clark University for organizing that recording. Before we continue, I'd like to take a group picture. So if you are comfortable, can everyone turn on your video, please? I'll have about maybe 10 seconds to give you time to open your video and we can take it.
Well, this is meaningful. I think I need you to disable me too.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyone else needs some
Yeah.
support in turning on their video? Please leave a message on the chat. Okay. Maybe 5 more seconds. All right, can I check with Ayu? Ayu, if you're ready to take picture? Okay, so on my cue, 1, 2, 3, hold. Okay, one more time. I think just hold because we have a few pages in this Zoom. So let's just hold for a while. Okay, are you all good? Yes. Okay. I think we're good. And if not, we can screenshot on YouTube. All right. Now I would like to invite our panelists to turn on their video and everyone else to please turn off your video so we can see our panelists. And maybe Febri and Ayu, can we spotlight the panelists, please? Craig will continue to moderate the live Q&A session, and I think we have a few questions or comments. So Craig, over to you if you're ready.
Thank you, Aquino, and thank you, esteemed panelists and audience, for being present today for our live session. Your presentations were very insightful, and we explore kind of diverse perspective on integration, coexisting, migration and inclusion, highlighting some very innovative projects. And so we now open the floor to our live audience to kind of continue the conversation that we had from our facilitated discussion. We're going to have about 20 minutes for Q&A. And this is an opportunity for us to really dive into a little bit deeper in the topics that we're discussing. I do encourage folks to see clarifications or share their own reflections based on what they've heard. We are monitoring the chat, so please put your questions in the chat and we'll pull those forward. I'll pose the questions to the panelists. Anybody is able to jump in at any time in speaking to a question. For those who are posing their questions, we do encourage you to put your name and your affiliation and try to make those questions as concise so that we can get through as much questions as possible. So let's begin and jump into things. So we have a question from the chat by Dr. Masood, who says, I'm very eager to hear the panelists' thoughts on the following topic. So the role of small NGOs, especially those established by refugees themselves in host countries, in addressing the challenges faced by urban refugees. This discussion feels especially urgent in today's difficult climate, where populist politicians increasingly portrays refugees, even highly capable individuals and refugee scholars, as the primary cause for national problems, overlooking their talents, capacity, and potential contributions. So the floor is open. Who want to jump in and start thinking or answering this question?
I can jump into the first questions. This is from my experience working with JAM's immigrants community with forced migrations backgrounds in Seattle. So what the NGO can contribute to their integrations. So in case of a JAM refugee community, since their establishment, they upon their arrival to the United States, they established the JAM refugee community. It's called SORCE and called CRC since 30 years ago. And then this community not only facilitate the integration of a JAM newcomer immigrants, but also other Muslim immigrants coming to Seattle by providing family and community-focused services, such as English lessons, referral services, and youth program and senior services. And so far, based on their data, this organization served more than 1,600 families since their establishment. So since their since their arrival to the United States, JAM refugee community not only can finally integrate to the community, but also they can serve to other community as well. So
Thank you, Tango. I'll invite Anita into the conversation. I know the Integration and Belonging Hub has done some work with refugee communities, and some of those organizations, nonprofits, are actually led by folks from displaced background.
Yeah, I was going to pivot a little bit towards a project that some of us in Worcester were part of called Worcester Shared Belonging. And I think what was interesting there, and to Dr. Masood's point, the role of migrant-led or organizations led by folks with particular experience of settling, of recreating belonging, but also having maybe global belonging ties elsewhere. That's a sort of a shared experience, and Worcester has a lot of people in that position who have been living in other parts of the world or living in other parts of the country and coming together into a urban space and sort of contributing to a transformation. And I think what we are starting to see and what we were privy to be part of before the pandemic is more horizontal connections between organizations that are that have this shared experience. But moreover, this shared experience also helps, I think, to explore ways that cities can transform in an ongoing way in the face of great challenges. So in other words, maybe people from migrant and refugee superpower of being able to transform and adapt to a changing climate, to changing politics, to changing different ways of making place. So I think that there is a way of thinking about mobility that could be very beneficial for our societies if we allow ourselves to learn from people with those backgrounds.
Thank you, Anita. Adam?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Anita said. Also being part of that project that she was referring to, and through more recent research and collaborations as well, I think a key difference, not wanting to generalize too much, but a key difference is that some refugee or migrant-led organizations, I think, are more likely to embrace like a holistic approach, sort of if their priority, if their objective is to sort of support that community, then that includes supporting all the intersecting needs of that community, including needs that intersect with the needs of other communities, right? And I think that allows such organizations to transcend some of the limitations that more traditional refugee resettlement organizations or non-refugee led organizations might encounter with in terms of like funding restrictions or just restrictions or limitations in the sense of like the framework that they rely on that maybe adhere to like a more mainstream or traditional sense of integration, right? As like a one-way street. So I think like a more intersectional approach to meeting community needs is something that this is my hypothesis anyway, and my anecdotal experience from my own encounters. Yeah, it's like a more intersectional approach to sort of meeting community needs from a migrant or refugee-led organization.
Thank you, Adam. And as somebody also participated in the project, also think around and strongly encourage folks as they think work with organizations that are led by folks from displaced background to go in kind of with an open mind and not with your own agenda, because oftentimes folks will what is important for that community in that moment might not be to transform or to kind of fight the fight in terms of how, nationally or even locally they see refugees. And I remember back in COVID, one of the things we heard from some of the organization is that their members are being impacted, at disproportionate numbers. And therefore their focus at that time was ensuring that their direct needs of the constituents that they serve were being met, and some of the broader systemic issues that were at play was not something that they had capacity to deal with at the time. Sometimes, as somebody who has worked in the space of equity, sometimes it's easier for some groups of folks to hear from people who have lived similar experiences to them, challenging their belief system, than from people who have lived experience, because oftentimes there is a resistance to hear and to be a part of those conversations, because they sometimes believe that folks are bringing up this conversation because they have this lived experience. I'll invite others into the conversation. If not, we'll move on to our next question. So our next one is really a comment for Aquino that says you might want to check out research on integration in transit in other countries around Europe, such as in Turkey and Greece and Poland and Morocco. Susan Rothman is suggesting that if you want to connect, then you can connect afterwards to talk a little bit more. Aquino?
Yes, thank you. I will do. I mean, we did check out some of the work in Turkey, in Jordan, in African countries. And I think we need, a little bit more research on the Southeast Asian part of the world in terms of that integration thing, because it's quite different, I think, but it's also very for me, it's also very interesting to see, what they have done, what people have done, other researchers have done in other parts of the world, that also talks about the context in transit, because then I understand that, transit itself, it's such a wide spectrum, there's a lot of differences in all these transit countries that connects to, how the country, work, the government, the governance, the political, the historical context of each country are very different as well. So I think, yeah, thank you for that. I will definitely also look at, some of the things that you suggested.
Thank you, Aquino, and we'll stay with you for a bit. The question was posed, really appreciate your thought about integration as living, multi-sided process and as a spectrum that differs from person to person. Do you have any thoughts about how to honor and engage with the multidimensionality effectively in research. And this is from Megan Taylor, a student at Boston College.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Megan. I think it's a question that I ask myself quite often, and I'm also eager to hear from all of you, the panelists here, in terms of how you deal with it. But I think one, it relates to our positionality as a researcher, and two is to also acknowledge that within research activities, there's always interaction, with other people, and other people have different roles, different positions as well, and to kind of acknowledge, that one have multiple identities when interacting with us. They can be a government officer, but they're also a mother, for example. They're also a family man, or so people have different sides of them, and I think it's about being aware of that, because sometimes in doing research, you just put on your researcher hat and kind of forget that other people have also multiple hats. And I think not only when interacting with those with lived experience, but also with other stakeholders that may have a different opposing position from what we view as right or just or whatever that is. So I think it's that bringing this experience as a researcher into I would say more subjective experience for us as well, and not necessarily see research as a really logical, objective. I have to be detached from all these things that I'm doing. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe others can add to that.
Anita, I'll invite you to share.
Thank you. I am interested in my own research as to how to move beyond some of the labels and state-oriented identities that are part of making people on the move legible and regulated by the states, and how sometimes researchers can reproduce those hierarchies between movers and settled people and if we're talking about multidimensional integration research, one of the questions is how do settled people perform integration? And when I've asked my students in the past, what would a non-migrant do for integration? And usually I get the kinds of answers that have to do with helping migrants do better with learning the language or learning cultural behaviors and things like that. But what I'm really asking is, how do we, those of us who are not movers, how do we integrate? How do we address some of the needs that settled communities have for maybe some aspect of change that maybe we could take responsibility for? And those are really hard ideas to change, because integration, the way that it is conceptualized, is really very state-based, that the state, the nation state has a framework within which all of us are expected to become something, or at least be not banging at the doors of what's acceptable and what's mainstream. So some of the scholars that I've been reading lately have included Adrian Favell, who wrote a very, very interesting book called The Integration Nation, who argues sort of the opposite that we do. He says that the nation is actually a process of integration. It's created through integration rather than the opposite. So I'll leave that thought with you, and maybe we can talk more about how that would actually look when we're doing research to sort of grapple or tussle with some of these ideas.
Thank you, Anita. So we're going to have to play a really delicate little dance here with time. And so a question to all the panelists, maybe a quick 1 minute or so kind of response. What are some kind of thinking about your work that you've done, what were some lessons that you learned from those processes, and what insights did you learn about the folks you were working with in terms of how they navigated identity? So for experience, because I see Adam first, I'm going to start off with Adam.
Thank you, Craig. I think one thing I'll say is somebody who has tried many times for many years to practice participatory action research is that I think we need to sort of check our own assumptions and expectations about that like everybody always wants a maximum of participation, or that our idea of participation and democratic research practice is the same as everybody else's. And that I think is a lesson that I learned in a particularly salient way working with people from refugee backgrounds who are sort of burdened in multiple different ways to carry out so many different kinds of labor, paid and unpaid. And so that's a lesson that I continue to learn. Yeah, I guess with 1 minute, I should leave it there.
Thank you, Adam. I'll invite Lyra into the conversation.
Sorry, guys. Sort of just woke up. Yeah, I agree with Adam. I mean, we assume they're going to be willing partners, and they aren't. A lot of times they are not willing partners, and I think partners is a good way of looking at it because we want them to be co-working with us, and I think we often assume that they're going to be delighted that, oh yeah, this is going to be great. We're going to be we're going to be helping them. We're going to be helping them. And I think that's, a narrative we have to change. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Lyra. Tango?
So I'd like to talk about my unique positionality as a move for myself and also as a researcher. So as a move for myself, and then during my field work, I stuck in the provisions as I'm working in academia, but then I have like a moral responsibility to what could we do in academia in the university to support them the refugee or immigrant community in Seattle, since Seattle is one of the biggest city in the United States, which become the destination for immigrants, and also as a sanctuary city itself. So it's still, I hope I can work it together with my University of Washington, and also universities in surroundings area, that we can probably become like a hub what the like university integration symbol have to in so I hope we can copy that programs here in Seattle. So
Thank you, Tango. Anita?
Oh gosh, I think I'll cede my time, Craig, because I held the for quite a bit too long. So I'll step back.
Thank you, Anita. I'll also cede my time, and I will give the last word to Aquino, who will close us out. But as we think about our closing, I do kind of encourage us to carry forward the insights that we've gained today into our own practices, to ensuring that we're elevating the voices of those who are marginalized and being inclusive and equitable in urban spaces.
Thank you, Craig. I think for me, it's what I've learned so far is that for me, for whatever I'm doing, research project, whatever that is, to be meaningful, I need to be authentically myself and have this kind of this, because that would help create, this deep engagement or connection with other people. And I think it's very difficult to do that when I'm not, when I have like this restriction in my head that, oh, I'm a researcher, or I am coming to this community as this and this and this. So what I'm taking forward is just be you at all times, at all activities that you do. So I think, Craig, we are done with the live Q&A session. Yes. Thank you very, very much for the moderation today. And also thank you all panelists for the discussion this evening and this morning. Hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as, if not more than I did. Everyone, if you haven't filled out the attendance form, please spare 5 minutes of your time to do so, because we need this to issue your e-certificate. Can I have the slides for the e-certificate thing, please? Yes. So scan the QR code on the screen or visit the conference website and find the link there for the e-certificate folder. Please note that the e-certificate for this webinar will be ready on the 30th of April, 30, yeah. And wrapping up for tonight, I'd like to say thank you to IASFM and the Integration and Belonging Hub at Clark University for enabling the webinar to happen, and also to the Department of Anthropology, Universitas Gadjah Mada. I see a lot of their students joining us tonight, so it's really encouraging. Special thanks to my team at RDI URAF for their super awesome support for tonight's technical operation. And on their behalf, I would like to apologize for any technical problem or any inconvenience today. And lastly, on behalf of the organizer and webinar partners, thank you everyone for your participation. We will see you again in another webinar. Terima kasih dan sampai jumpa.